Welcome back to Hannahween month. Now, as with the month of October, what's the thing you usually think of when you think of Halloween? Monsters. Yeah, Frankenstein's monster, werewolves, witches, and of course, vampires. Now, of course, we know about, the classic vampire Dracula, but sadly, a lot of people do seem to forget one of the vampires that changed the course of horror forever. And that, of course, was Count Orlok from Nosferatu. In the 1920s, a director by the name of Frederick Wilhelm Murnau wanted to do his own version of Dracula. But however, he couldn't get the rights to Dracula, so he basically made a rip-off film of Dracula called Nosferatu. If you know the story of Dracula, you know the story of Nosferatu. The only things that were really different were the characters' names, a few plot elements, and especially the ending. Nosferatu is considered a classic amongst the horror genre. It's one of the first horror films to ever come out. This movie was so popular, in fact, that it actually got a remake in 1979 by Werner Herzog called Nosferatu the Vampire. And funny enough, Nosferatu the Vampire actually got just as many good reviews as the original, which begs the question, which version is better? These two are very similar films. Like, so similar that really almost plot point by plot point, it's the exact same storyline. But the interesting thing about these movies is not just how similar they are through their plot points, but how different they are through how they approach them. Since the original was one of the first horror films ever made, and hell, it came out in the 1920s and movies were actually still new by then, the film presents itself as almost like a gigantic play, like a cinematic play, and the film's also included by a giant orchestra. Now, this depends on which version you watch, because the original music sheets, I think, were lost or destroyed or something. Basically, you can't recreate whatever music they had in the original screenings of this film. So over the years, composers have written their own music for the film, and so the feel of the music feels very different from which version you watch. However, the remake takes it in a very different way than the original. As opposed to the really big, loud, extravagant cinematic play that the original was, the remake actually takes it in a very quiet and almost ominous tone. Like, you hear lots of church choirs, there's lots of heavy atmosphere. Hell, a lot of the scenes actually don't even have music in them. It just lets you feel the weight of the situation. For example, let me compare two versions of the same scene. The scene where our lead hero accidentally cuts his finger while cutting a piece of bread. Check out how both these films handle that scene.
The knife is old and could be dirty. It could give you blood poisoning. Please, let me do it. It's the oldest remedy in the world.
Oh, forget it. It's hardly worth mentioning. Just a little cut.
You know, it's only for the best.
And since it had been a very long time since the original came out, Werner Herzog did decide to do the remake as a slow burn horror, and even expanding on some plot elements. Also, I'm going to be giving away some spoilers, although you can find both versions on YouTube. So if you haven't seen them, then watch them and come back to this video. Or if you don't care, then still watch the video. I don't know. Anyway, back to the whole thing about the remake expanding on some ideas that the original planted. In the original, it's kind of shown a little bit that Count Orlok was the one who started the Black Plague. Wherever Count Orlok went, the rats followed him, and spreading the Black Plague to this local town. Again, you see a little bit of it, like you see the rats, but you don't actually see the effect it has on the people. What do they do about the Black Plague in this film? People accept it. And what I mean by accepting it is that the people just lose all hope. After so many people have already died from the plague ever since the vampire came in, the citizens just lose all hope and just sort of accept it. They accept that eventually the plague is going to get them. They just start dancing in the streets. They start eating outside, even though a bunch of rats are just scuttling around them and crawling all over the place. It's just hopeless. It's just so depressing, but it works. It's so terrifying to think that this probably actually did happen. Not the vampire stuff, of course, but, you know, the whole thing about people just losing hope after the Black Plague had just killed so many people. And my God, I'm telling you, it's the scariest thing in the entire film. And that's what the remake of Nosferatu does. It takes a lot of the ideas that the original had, but expands upon them to create an even more horrifying atmosphere. Now let's talk about the vampire himself. As he is known in the original, he's Count Orlok. But however, in the remake, he's known as Count Dracula, because, like I said, the copyright had expired by that point. Which one do I think is better from these two? Count Orlok in the original, played by Max Schreck, is a very strong presence. Like that image alone is so iconic. Although I might lean towards the version from the remake, played by Klaus Kinski. This guy just seems less like a person and more like a creature. As you saw in that one clip I showed you, he comes across as more unstable than the one in the original. He seems further removed from humanity, and really, in my opinion, that's really scary, because if you have someone who looks like a person, but doesn't really act like one, that's kind of terrifying, actually. In the original, he still is a pretty strong presence, but it is pretty clear that he is a little bit more dignified. Of course, he's not suave like Dracula or anything, but it does seem like in the remake he's a little bit more unstable and therefore a little bit more unpredictable. You don't really know what he's going to do. Now let's talk about the lead hero of the film. In the original, his name is Thomas Hutter, where in the remake he's known as Jonathan Harker. I think, again, it's pretty clear the remake did him better. In the original, he kind of comes across as a bumbling idiot. He seems like this guy who's like, do, I'm on my lovely day. But then, when he meets Count Orlok, he's scared out of his mind, but he kind of acts a little bit stupid. Or at least looks like he's stupid. In the remake, he is very scared of the vampire, but it's almost like he's not cowering from him because he's so deathly afraid of him. It seems more like the vampire has some sort of, maybe like a mind-controlling thing or sort of like a minor bit of hypnosis going on. It's really hard to explain. It almost feels like he's putting his victims in a trance before he kills them, which again is pretty creepy. Now let's talk about the lead female character in this film, Ellen. In the original, she seemed, again, sort of like her husband in the original, kind of stupid. Like, she kind of makes really bold decisions, and a lot of the things she does is never really explained, or not even really explained. It's more like she kind of does things out of nowhere. Where in the remake, because of the pacing and the directing, it kind of makes sense why she would do a lot of these strange things. Like, sleepwalking on the balcony or something. Also, it's pretty interesting what they do with her in the remake. Because, like I said, the remake does expand on a lot of things that weren't really that explored in the original. In the remake, around the second half of the film, Ellen actually becomes the lead hero. In the remake, after Dracula bites Jonathan Harker, he starts to feel woozy. He starts to forget about what his life is. He starts to forget who Ellen is. And you can start to see that he's starting to transform, which is done brilliantly in the ending. But, whatever the case, she doesn't know why he's acting like this. All she knows is that this happened right after he met with Count Dracula. And so she's off to find, Dracula, or find out why her husband is acting this way. And hell, she's even trying to investigate as to what happened with the plague. Like, the plague is happening, and she's like, what's going on? And she's actually trying to find out why the plague is actually a thing. And she starts to put the pieces together that this whole thing is probably revolving around Dracula, who just recently moved into the town. Her character is actually really well developed in the remake, much more than the original, right down to the ending, which, super spoilers, again, if you haven't seen it, again, watch it, but this is like the big spoiler of the film, like, the ending. In the original, Count Orlok bites Ellen, and basically doesn't realize that the sun is rising, and so when he sees that, he dies. But in the remake, again, it's really clever how they do it. The scene normally plays out how the original played out, except in the remake, she does this as a distraction. She has the vampire bite her and drink her blood, and whenever he tries to, pull away, she sort of pulls him back in for more blood to distract him from the sun coming up. And once the sun does rise, it's too late for the vampire, so he dies, but at the cost of that, Ellen sacrifices her life for the good of humanity. That is such an amazing character arc for a character who didn't really have that much of an impact on the original at all. So, which version do I think is better? The original Nosferatu or the remake Nosferatu the Vampire? Of course it's the remake. I do recognize what an influence the original was to cinema. It really changed the game as to the artistic stuff you could do with film, which was a new medium at the time. But when you look at it nowadays, it doesn't quite hold up, for a number of reasons. One, basic filmmaking flaws. There are many scenes that are supposed to take place during the night, and I didn't even know they took place during the night, because they filmed during the day. And even though there are some versions where like the daytime scenes have a yellow filter and the nighttime scenes have a blue filter, it still doesn't help me buy into the fact that the night scenes happen during the night. It's very clear that they're shooting during the day. And yes, I know they didn't have much to work with, but if I have to criticize movies today, I have to criticize the movies that came out back then. Also, a lot of random things in the original just happen for no reason whatsoever. For example, apparently there's werewolves in this world. Yeah, although only for like 30 seconds. Because there's a scene in the original where, you know, someone says to Thomas, "You can't go out there, there's werewolves." And then it cuts to an aardwolf, which isn't even a wolf. In fact, it's more of a hyena relative that eats termites and lives in Africa. And it only appears for like 5 or 10 seconds. I'll prove it to you. Here's the full scene from that. Yeah, you never see the werewolf again. It just appears out of nowhere. And if I'm going to be honest, the original has a lot of pacing issues. It doesn't have that kind of cadence. It doesn't really have a whole lot that makes me glue my eyes to the screen. There are many parts where I do think it's kind of boring. Where in the remake, everything does serve a purpose. The pacing is just amazing. Not once did I ever feel bored in the film. The remake has better acting, it has better writing, it has better cinematography, but most of all, it has better pacing than the original. I will say in the remake, I do have one issue. Sometimes the editing is off. Like sometimes scenes will just start without much of a segue. I feel like that could have been done a little bit better. Again, I do recognize that the original holds its place in cinema, but as to which one I think is the better film, for me it's a no-brainer. It's the remake. So yeah, what do you think of both films? Have you seen both films? Again, give them a watch. They're both on YouTube and whatnot. But whatever your thoughts may be, let me know down in the comments below what you think. Thank you so much for watching. Give this video a like. Share the video so we can get the channel circulated. Don't forget to support my Patreon on my Patreon page. Or if you can't do that, consider supporting me through my PayPal button, my PayPal donation button in the description below. And if you want to see more, click this.